Today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, which is equalizing our speakers to the room or the room to the speakers. And it's a fairly controversial subject. It's one that I will touch on lightly and try and explain what's going on, and then we can go from there. So this actually comes from two people, Stanley in Lawrence, Georgia, and Ryan in Ottawa, Canada, And they asked pretty much the same question. Is equalizing your room different from flattening out your speaker? What are your thoughts about using EQ within the digital domain prior to a DAC for room correction and the flattening of frequency response between plus and minus 6 dB, blah, 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 blah. Let me explain basically what this all means. Loudspeakers and rooms are companions. So one doesn't work too well without the other. Well, obviously, rooms don't make much noise on their own. Okay, all right. So that was poorly said. But what I mean to say is that the room plays a big part in how our loudspeakers sound. For example, if you take a pair of speakers and put them outside, something I have certainly done, and play them, it's not very impressive. I don't care how big the speakers are. It's just empty sounding. There's nearly no bass unless you're standing right in front of it. Try it sometime. You have a pair of bookshelves or something. Bring them out in the patio, and stand back how far you would normally be from them, and it's a pretty disappointing experience. And the reason is we need our rooms. Our speakers are designed to work within rooms, unless you've got some big Grateful Dead wall of sound thing, when that of course is designed to work in an outdoor concert setting. But we need our rooms, and speakers depend on the reflections of sound within our rooms to reproduce what we would consider live music. And we go to all manner of trouble to damp our rooms, to do all sorts of things to make them sound as good as possible, because you don't want to put it into a solid stone room that's going to be echoic, which means it vibrates all the time, and you don't want it in an anechoic situation where it's way too damp, so live or dead. And a careful blend between the two is really important. That said, all rooms, while they're beneficial, also have a number of problems. And those problems are too many to go through in this short video series. But you've heard it. You stand in one part of the room and the system sounds different. You stand in another, it has bass. You move back 2 or 3 feet and there's no bass. There's standing waves. There are bumps and dips and all kinds of things in a room that really make playing speakers a challenge. So there are devices that provide room correction. And what they do is essentially place a microphone in the listening position and play a pink noise or play some type of an impulse that will measure a known signal against what is actually being received in the listening position. And then through filters and digital EQ, everything is kind of straightened out. The peaks of the room where things get really loud at certain frequencies are pulled down, and the dips where there's a lack of sound are pulled up and flattened out. What's actually happening in this case is your speakers, instead of reproducing a flat signal, are now reproducing the opposite of what your room is doing. So imagine you had a 500 hertz peak in your room. Your speaker, every time it reproduces 500 hertz, is going to have a dip. And the dip is designed so that when it plays in the room which is amplifying that 500 hertz, it picks it back up and you get a flat frequency response. Kind of makes sense. What doesn't work is the impact that digital room correction has. Now, I know there's a lot of people that love it. I have a home theater, and I use a small amount of digital EQ in the home theater, and it does work. I don't allow it to pull anything up. If we're going to do room correction, I only want to reduce peaks. I don't want to bring up dips, but that's just me. In general, I don't like it, especially in a high-end audio system. And I can hear the howls now. My good friend Doug Goldberg, who is a brilliant engineer at Northrop Grumman, McGowan, you got to get into the 20th century, even the 21st century, and add room correction into your speakers. And as a purist, I don't like the idea. What I prefer is to correct the room itself. Now, there's a number of different ways to do it. I even invented a system that lined the walls of the room in sparse manners in certain places along the room, where those speakers would put anti-phase signals as measured from a microphone live to correct the room itself, where the speakers are playing flat and now the room is reacting. And I never did much with that invention. Someday I'd really like to pursue that, sort of an active room, if you will. I mean, I envision sitting down in the active room and thinking, okay, if this were an auditorium and I close my eyes and I listen and I clap my hands, well, I would hear a huge amount of space. What I'm hearing now is my room, which is kind of small, right? So when I clap my hands, I can tell with my eyes closed I'm in a small room. But imagine that the room itself was active and it was able to reproduce the actual sound of my hand clapping in a 300-foot auditorium. When I close my eyes and do that, I would, I'm actually in a big room. And now if I play my speakers, then I would hear my speakers playing in a big room. But that's my wild imagination. So in general, that's what room EQ is. I am not a fan of it. A lot of people are. I don't like the temporal distortions that happen. I think it does more damage than it does good. So that's just me. I am not a fan. But it's a great question, and thank you for asking.